Hello everyone, this is part 25 of What If Naruto Passed the Genin test, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Sunrise. I need a room for the night, said the gangly old man to the innkeeper sitting on a stool on the other end of the counter. I've got a long way to go, and I'm very tired. The pudgy landlord scanned the vacancy book on the oak counter before him with swarthy eyes, then looked back at the elderly gentleman. He didn't bother to look the man in the eyes, but rather took notice of the rags across his back and the lack of a coin purse at his belt. Sorry, said the innkeeper tersely, his breath as thick with cigar smoke as the air in the inn's crowded bar room, but I don't give out charity. It's going to cost you 2 silver pieces for the night, and I won't take anything but silver, not in this rural part of the country anyway, can't trust anything but hard currency. The old man's shoulders drooped. I can't pay that, he said quietly. Is there any way you could spare me an empty room just for one night? No, said the innkeeper flatly, you're welcome to stay in here, but unless you can pay, a seat at the bar is the most you're going to get. The old man leaned a little heavier on his cane and turned away. I suppose that's better than nothing, he said as he walked over to one of the tables and sat down in an empty chair. The main room of the inn was packed full of people huddled around little circular tables. It seemed as though everyone had a smoking cigarette or cigar in their mouth, and the air was a sickly charcoal color. The orange light streaming in from the sunset outside caused strange shadows to dance on the floor and walls while the smoke in the air shifted as the people moved around. The fireplace in the corner was and piled high with ashes. Its services would be unnecessary anyway, as all of the boss packed into the room raised the temperature to near 80 degrees. The smell of sweat and body odor was only a little less prominent than the smell of cigarette smoke. Now what? The old man asked himself in a raspy voice that was swallowed up by the drunken racket all around him. He reached up and ran a hand over his bald scalp, tracing his fingers over the knotted scar that twisted across his skull, thinking. Something wrong? Asked an almost wraith-like figure sitting motionlessly beside the man. You seem to be having a bit of a disagreement with the proprietor here. You could say that, he answered, his voice still quiet. Bloody vultures of barkeeps. No sense of charity, he laughed a little to himself. What's your name? Asked the figure. Hashimura Kij, said the old man, burned out old architect at your service. How about yourself? Just a wandering ninja, he replied, his voice a little muffled by the black cloak over his head. Really? Said the old man. Kij turned to the figure sitting beside him. The ninja was wearing the strangest black clothes. The suit looked almost like tight-fitting leather armor, but the rough and rigid material was jet black and more like incredibly stiff cloth than leather. Several seams traced across the material, TSLE stat, adding to the segmented look. Across the left shoulder it looked as though some kind of embossed insignia had been removed from the suit. How did you get that scar, Hashimura-san? Asked the ninja, his icy blue eyes not shifting from the untouched malt beer in front of him. My last job was a little hazardous, said Kij in an amused tone. I was working in the wave about 3 years back building that big bridge to span the channel. There was some mob boss, I can't remember his name but he's long now. He wanted anyone working on the bridge and sent a little army to see it done. Kij stared off into the distance as old men often do when telling stories about their past that they're proud of. His voice was fuller and a little less scratchy as he recalled all the blow-by-blow details of the night. It had been freezing cold and pouring rain. He could remember thinking he was going to when the mercenary's sword skimmed across his scalp, and every memory wound its way into the story. The ninja in the hood listened. He turned his head just a little and golden spikes of hair edged from beneath the hood. He quickly and subtly tucked the locks back out of sight. And, Kij said, his voice a little deeper as he reached the height of the story. By now he'd drawn a small audience from those around him. Some were listening with cynical humor at the ramblings of an old man, while others seemed to soak in the bard's tale. Just as we thought it was over, the ninja who had come to protect us flashed red and destroyed all of the enemies. He set their boats aflame and burned them to ashes with his fiery red light. It was like heaven itself was coming to our defense, and we won. Kij settled down a little bit and sank into his chair, his story finished. I have a bit of an appreciation for all the things ninja do for us, he said under his breath. Even those from another country are so willing to come to our aid. The ninja in black waited silently until the chatter had died down around him. When the last direct rays of the sun fell behind the horizon and were blocked out, he stood up slowly and without a sound. With a quick and fluid motion, he pulled out of his pocket a small but fat black pouch and dropped it onto the table in front of Kij. Coins rattled in the velvet folds as it landed, and a single gold piece popped out of the top. What's this? Asked the old man, looking between the ninja and the coin purse. There were 4, he said quietly and with no emotion in his voice, that night on the bridge. You have an appreciation for ninja, and I value that. Call this compensation. Kij shifted around and caught a glimpse of the nin's face. Immediately recognition streaked across his own along with shock and gratitude. He mouthed a silent thank you as he slowly put the purse into his tattered cloak. The ninja turned and glided between the tables and people like a ghost. His steps were noiseless and his motions were so fluid one might have thought him a wisp of smoke as he opened the door and disappeared into the twilight outside. He turned onto the dirt path and began to walk quickly down the side of the road that wound along the edge of the forest. Any civilization aside from the inn was a day's walk away, but despite this and the encroaching night he walked on. Any luck, Jiraiya? Asked the ninja flatly in the dark. The dirt moved just a little as a large man in a red robe walked out of the forest and stood beside the nin in black. None, said the man. He wasn't at the inn, said the ninja, throwing his hood back and letting his golden hair fall into its usual spiky disarray, and I couldn't pick up the trail anywhere near here. I think he doubled back and got away. Knowing his luck, he's probably already out of the country. Too bad, said Jiraiya as they turned and began to walk through the woods, but maybe just as well. Even if we did manage to catch up to him, Orochimaru might have gotten the better of us. But what was he doing this close to Konoha? Asked the blonde ninja. Who knows, Naruto? Jiraiya sighed, his voice laced with worry. But whatever the reason, we'll need to report this to Tsunade when we get back into Konoha tomorrow. Right, said Naruto flatly. I'll make sure to file a report. Jiraiya eyed his student as their pace picked up and they began to run between the trees. You sound riveted to be getting back, said the Sannin. We've been gone 3 years, and we've had no contact with them for 18 months, and you can't think of anything more exciting to do than file a report. Naruto grinned, quickening the run to what would be a sprint for any normal human. I can think of a few things, he said. But first things first. Don't worry about that, said Jiraiya. I'll make sure to get all the necessary details to Tsunade and I'll take the heat for cutting off communications. Damn, she's going to be furious about that. There was genuine anxiety in his voice. However, I want to focus on just getting readjusted. Go around on the town. Pick up a few girls and buy a nice house or something. Do you think I'm made of money? Asked Naruto. Now Jiraiya smiled. 3 years as a top-dollar mercenary and bodyguard, working for an ounce of gold per day, I'd think you can afford the nicety of a comfortable home. Naruto shrugged in mid-stride. Maybe I will. But let's not make a big entrance. I'd much rather it be as subtle as possible, he said, ending the conversation. They ran silently and swiftly all through the night without tiring. They left no tracks or marks of their passing, despite covering dozens of feet with every stride they took. It was almost dawn, and the first rays of the sun were just edging over the eastern horizon as the 2 ninja crested a hill and looked down into the forest surrounding Konoha. The village didn't seem to have changed much. The massive holes in the wall, memories of the sound invasion, were nothing more than memories themselves now and were completely and seamlessly filled in. The houses inside seemed a little more clustered as a few more apartment complexes had been added. Look at that, said Jiraiya, pointing towards the greatest change in the village. They got Tsunade's ugly mug up on the mountainside. Both ninja chuckled and stared down at the village. Shall we? Asked the Sannin, gesturing towards the gate. Naruto shrugged an affirmative and they quickly made their way down the shallow slope. Before the sun had gained any noticeable altitude, both ninja were standing in the shadow of the large portcullis-covered gate as Jiraiya pulled a small bronze key from the folds of his clothes. He quietly unlocked the nearly invisible side door craftily laid into the gate and opened it just enough. Naruto passed through, followed by the Sannin. Jiraiya let the door swing back closed with a heavy click as the locking mechanism reactivated. There were only a dozen or so people in the square behind the gate, but none of them seemed to notice as the two ninja entered. I'm off, said Jiraiya, turning on his heel. If you need me, I'll be at the Hokage's office. If I need you, I'll come find you. Until then though, just enjoy being back. Naruto just nodded without really answering as the Sannin walked off down the sidewalk. He looked around for a moment, not sure exactly what he should be doing, until a realization hit him square in the gut. I'm hungry, he murmured, and Ichiraku isn't far from here. I wonder if they still have that breakfast special going on. And with that, Naruto turned down the main street and started to wander back into the city. Probably not. It was a pleasant stroll. The village had yet to fully wake up, and thusly there were very few people up and about. Naruto walked with his hands in his pockets, taking in the familiar surroundings until he came to the slight bend in the road that marked the turn to Ichiraku Ramen. Naruto followed the bend and caught sight of the shack by the edge of the road. He walked up and pushed the shades out of the way. Naruto. A familiar voice immediately squealed. The blonde nin glanced around, catching sight of the cute and always bubbly hostess of the ramen bar. Good morning, Ayami, he said matter-of-factly, stepping in and taking a seat on one of the stools. Ayami faltered, expecting Naruto to be a little more upbeat, especially after she instantly recognized him. Where have you been? What have you been up to? Rumors were going around that you were s. What can I get you? She rambled after a second's pause. What would you recommend? Asked Naruto, ignoring all but the last question as a small grin curled his lip. Well, said the woman in the apron. What would you like? Business has been good lately, so we took the chance to update our menu with all kinds of new and exotic flavors. She gestured to the large white sign hanging on the wall. It boldly displayed their ramen options in big red and gold letters. Personally, I think the Tabasco is pretty tasty. Naruto nodded. I'll have a bowl of that then. Ayami bowed just a little and turned around, opening the cabinet and taking out a brick of ramen with one hand while firing up the fryer with the other. So where have you been all this time? She asked pleasantly. A lot of people around here seemed worried when you disappeared 3 years ago. Tsunade must have kept my trip with Jiraiya under wraps, Naruto thought. That makes this a lot easier. I just thought it would be nice to get out and see the world a bit, said the blonde ninja in a cordial tone. I traveled out of the country and toured around with a few different groups of people. Ayami nodded, wanting more details as she dropped the ramen into the boiling oil. Well, she said, it's nice to have our favorite customer back. Are you going to stay with us for a while or do you plan on heading out again anytime soon? I'll be back for as long as people will have me, said the ninja shrugging. Good, said the hostess after a moment, pulling the noodles out of the oil with some tongs and dropping them into a bowl of broth. She sprinkled a few spices over the top of the meal and dumped in some of the contents of a red bottle. Then with a smile she turned around and set it on the bar in front of him. Thank you very much, said Naruto as he grabbed a pair of chopsticks from the small bucket of them on the counter. Absolutely no trouble at all, said Ayami. She leaned back against the cupboard and crossed her arms. So where all did you go? Naruto had to pause and swallow the mouthful of noodles he'd already shoveled between his teeth. I went to Suna for the first few months, he said, then took another bite. Did a little work with them to help improve village relations. The hostess nodded politely. After that I just dropped off the map, continued Naruto, not really wanting to reveal too many details of his journeys. Toured around with a few friends mostly, he said. Well, said Ayami, leaning forward just a bit, at any rate it's good to know you're alright. After everything that happened before you left no one was sure if you'd ever come back. Naruto flinched and looked down at the bar. I'm sorry, Ayami said quietly, instantly regretting that she'd brought up that particular turn of events. No, you're fine, said Naruto smiling. No harm done. Ayami smiled back, just as another customer, a tall man in a brown suit walked through the curtain and sat at the bar. Before the hostess could even greet him, another man, this one in a white t-shirt, jeans and followed by a pretty blonde woman, strolled in and sat down. That would be the morning rush, said Ayami, casting a sidelong glance at Naruto just as the customers all began to order simultaneously. Another two women walked in with a teenage girl behind them and, without even glancing at the hostess, began making their orders too. On the house, said Ayami to the blonde ninja. Naruto nodded, standing up and watching as Ayami took all of the sudden and hectic business in stride. Sure, he said, reaching into a pocket and pulling out a large silver coin. He casually set it on the countertop while Ayami wasn't looking, then, accidentally, knocked it over the bar so it landed on the tile floor by the fryer. By the time Ayami heard the metallic clink, Naruto had already left the shack. What the hell were you thinking? Tsunade shouted in her office. Shizune sighed as she leaned against the anteroom wall and listened to the noises erupt through the thick oak door beside her. She, along with most of the rest of Konoha, she was sure, could easily make out every word Tsunade was bellowing at Jiraiya in her office. Do you have any idea how many rules of protocol you broke when you cut off communications? Screamed the Hokage. I can't think of one good reason why I shouldn't have you drug out and flogged. This is by far one of the most stupid things you've ever done. Jiraiya rested his weight against the wall and tried to look like he wasn't afraid of the fuming woman before him. He didn't speak, mostly because he knew that to interrupt the Hokage would have severe repercussions, and instead just let her scream herself out. He just didn't realize how long her lungs could hold. It was nearly half an hour before Tsunade finally stopped pacing and began to calm down, during which time she smeared Jiraiya with a few dozen names like icing from a sewer trap, some of which would have caused the paint to peel off the wall if she'd managed to say them any louder. Eventually though, she had run out of obscenities to hurl at him, that or she'd run out of breath, and Tsunade merely glowered at her old teammate with her fists locked down at her sides. Good to know you missed me, said the man in the red robes. The last thing I missed, growled the old woman, was your impeccable technique for pissing me off. Even so, said the hermit shrugging, is it my turn to speak now? Only if you're going to explain yourself, responded the woman. Fine, said Jiraiya. I cut off communications because the last letter I sent was intercepted by one of Orochimaru's spies and I didn't want to risk any important information leaking. How could you possibly know that? Because I had Naruto follow the messenger. And, probed Tsunade, her voice a little quieter but her eyes still furious. And, Naruto watched as the messenger was attacked by a ninja from the sound. By that point I'd suspected for a while that Orochimaru was tampering with the letters I was sending back, and after Naruto confirmed it I had no choice but to stop sending them at all. You could have sent them through a more secure route, said the Hokage. Such as? Jiraiya asked rhetorically. If one of my toads can't get through then I doubt any of the more conventional methods would suffice. Tsunade didn't answer. But, said the hermit, all this is really beside the point. Right, growled the Hokage. Just get on with your report. You've got more than a year to cover and I don't have time to waste. Sure. In the last letter I sent, said Jiraiya, I told you that Naruto and I were going to be heading north to investigate a string of moves we heard about from Kazekage Gaara while we were in Suna. Yes, I remember that, said Tsunade. Gaara visited about a year ago to attend a wedding and he spoke fondly of you and Naruto, mentioned that you'd helped his guards clean up some kind of insurrection. He didn't clarify though. Jiraiya nodded. Yes, there was some trouble with renegade Sand Nin trying to defect to the sound, and Naruto was more than happy to deal with the problem. Good, said Tsunade, her voice not quite as angry as before, anything to spite them and help Suna. But go on. You were headed to investigate. Gaara had told us about a series of moves in a northern village and Naruto wanted to check it out so we did. What we found when we reached the city was that 86 people had been killed. They were all made in their homes, with their boss fairly mutilated. The city officials had no idea what was going on but were managing to keep the trouble mostly behind closed doors. Tsunade raised an eyebrow and waited for Jiraiya to go on. The old man paused for a few moments, as if he were trying to think of the best words to describe some unbelievable story. In a nutshell, he continued, Naruto and I worked with the town guard to patrol the streets and rooftops for a few nights. We followed the guard, gave them some basic pointers on what to do, in exchange for adequate compensation. Of course, the Hokage sighed, turning around and sitting in her chair. For the first week we didn't find anything and 4 more people turned up. On the 8th night however, we hit a break. I was out with one of the mercenary ninja the town had hired on as guards, when we saw a dark man break into a house via a third-story window. We followed him in and chased him out just before he killed the woman of the house. It ended up being a chase that took us all over the city. Were they a ninja? Asked Tsunade. Not officially, said the other Sannin, but it was obvious that they had had some kind of training because he dodged me at every turn. At any rate, Naruto intercepted him. After some convincing he revealed that he had indeed been a ninja, under Orochimaru. Not surprising, groaned Tsunade. Did he mention why he was Ming random people, or were the Mus random at all? Oh, they were very random, said Jiraiya. The cur was completely insane. Orochimaru had been doing some experimenting on him with a new cursed seal and it was too much for his mind to handle. Tsunade bit her lip as Jiraiya paused to let her process the story thus far. Was it the same kind of seal he put on Sasuke? Asked the Hokage. Yes, Jiraiya said solemnly, shaking his head, the exact same, but we couldn't get anything more out of him. After the psycho told us that much he degenerated into meaningless drivel, ranting and raving about how he existed to kill and destroy. And, asked Tsunade, what did you do with him? Jiraiya paused. We decided it was best to remove him as a threat. So you killed him in other words. On the spot. Tsunade shifted in her seat and shuffled a few papers around on her desk. Any anger had left her face. Now she just looked worried and thoughtful. For several long minutes neither one spoke. Jiraiya sat down in a chair opposite the desk, while the Hokage leaned forward and rested her chin on her knuckles. I suppose you mean to say, said the woman in a melancholy voice, that Naruto killed him on the spot. Jiraiya nodded. The boys developed an acute sense of justice. If he sees someone suffering under injustice, he'll go far out of his way to correct the problem. If that means killing someone causing harm, then it's fine with him. I don't mean to get off topic, said the woman, almost uneasily, but how's Naruto doing? Is he recovering from the incident? He looked to be getting better for a while, said the Sannin in red. I could see the humor, the genuine humor, not that artificial he so often sold people, starting to seep back into him. After he ran into the mayor in Tsunade's territory though, he began rebuilding his walls. I tried to get him to loosen back up, but Naruto wouldn't have any of it. He began to become completely absorbed in his training, so much so that he was mastering jutsu as fast as I could teach him. He never became anywhere near as distant as he was right before we left 3 years ago, but he's still not his old self at all. Is he emotionally slay? She asked coldly. Define slay. Tsunade sighed. Answer my question. You know exactly what I mean. The old man recrossed his arms and frowned. He's not going to head off on a mouse rampage if that's what you're asking. And frankly I don't give a damn if you are Hokage, don't insinuate anything about Naruto. You haven't been there to watch him. There was a thinly veiled venom in Jiraiya's suddenly defensive words. I wasn't trying to insinuate anything about your student Jiraiya, Tsunade said, putting her hands up in a placating posture. But it's a simple fact that Naruto was, for all practical purposes, temporarily insane after Ino SD. As leader of the village, I can't risk anything that would put Konoha in harm's way. I had to ask. She watched as her visitor's face hardened. Fine, said the other Sannin, I can guarantee that he's far beyond that condition now. He may not be completely over it just yet, but he is in no way a threat to anyone loyal to Konoha. Good, said the Hokage. That's what I needed to know. Now, back to your report. Shrugging, Jiraiya uncrossed his arms. After we left Suna, things got pretty boring really, he said. If you want I'll put all of the details into a written report, but nothing particularly major happened for almost 2 years. Summarize, demanded the Hokage. Wow, you're the same old Tsunade all right, said Jiraiya sarcastically. This job hasn't changed you at all. Just get on with it. Fine. After we left the village the two of us made our way east and north with no real destination in mind. Naruto continued to train like mad, mastering everything I threw at him. We made our way from village to village for a month until we ran into a group of elite mercenaries called the Crane Organization. Long story short, we went into business with them because they were currently under a contract to hunt down and kill ninja known to be affiliated with the Sound. Wait, Tsunade interrupted. I know about the Crane Organization. They're neutral in all international affairs and always have been. Unless someone was paying them with the world on a platter, they'd never attack any affiliated ninja. Who the hell hired them? Nobody knows, said Jiraiya. Even the organization's leaders didn't know the party's real name, but the going price was generous to say the least, and Naruto and I worked for a king's salary, so we decided to give it a try. And we spent months on end stalking and king spies. It was almost fun at times. The only requirement was that we get the target while they were alone and have no witnesses. A small grin flitted across Tsunde's lips. And you were under the crane's umbrella, so there was no need to worry about politics. I guess there wasn't, said the old man, mirroring Tsunde's smile, so that's where we amassed our fortune and the work took us all over the continent. There were times we were within a few miles of the Sound's borders, and there were times we were hundreds of miles away. Then, about 4 weeks ago, we ran across the trail of our old friend Kabuto, not 3 days' journey from here. Tsunde just raised an eyebrow and shifted in her seat. Needless to say, we followed it. The only trouble was when his trail crossed Orochimaru's and we decided to change course to follow the bigger game. We trailed him as he went about almost randomly within our borders, but yesterday the trail went cold just south of the Arbor Forest. So, we decided it was time to come home anyway, and here we are. The report is noted, said the Hokage in an official sounding tone. I'll be waiting for the written version. I'll make sure to get the book to you as soon as I get time, said the old man, leaning back against the wall, a bit more relaxed. How's it been here while I was gone? Things didn't go to pot too quickly, did they? Officially, said Tsunde, things are fine. Our military is at 100%, the economy is booming, and taxes are down. Jiraiya looked out the window. And unofficially, things are going to hell, said Tsunde, setting her hands on the desk and leaning down to rest her chin on her knuckles. Oh, how so? Tsunde looked up at him and shrugged. The political scene is a total mess, Jiraiya, she groaned, rubbing her temples. Tsunde is on the verge of war with the mist over old treaty violations. The Sound is threatening to attack sooner either side declares war, and if that happens then I'll have no choice but to join in on Gaara's behalf since they're our best ally. I have no idea how the third managed to keep the peace. He didn't have Orochimaru and the Sound to deal with, pointed out the Sannin in red. I didn't know things were this bad. 3 years is a long time. A lot can happen and it only looks to get worse. Tsunde sounded exasperated now, like she was discussing a bitter subject with herself as much as politics with an old friend. Most of the other villages are trying to stay neutral and avoid contact with Tsunde, Orochimaru, Mist and Konoha altogether, but my spies and ambassadors alike are reporting increased military build-up in every other hidden village, no exceptions. Shikamaru, one of my best agents, just returned from some of the southern powers and informed me that their sentiments lie with the Sound. Both of them were silent for a long moment. Tsunde stood up and walked to the window. Crossing her arms behind her back, she stared out it towards the sun, still hanging low in the morning sky. Jiraiya simply stared at the floor. Do you really think it will come to war? Asked Jiraiya. Tsunde didn't answer for several minutes. She looked out the window, the same way she had hundreds of times before, and gazed at the shadows the buildings cast into the streets. She'd memorized the inky images long ago, and she knew exactly what they would become as the sun rose into the noonday hours. I'm not going to let that happen. Tsunde's voice was hard and cold. The old man stepped up beside her and looked out into the street. And what if it does? I was deaf to the politics, but I'm not so blind as to have missed how each country was building its forces. A war this massive would tear the world apart at the seams. Everything as we know it would be changed forever. I know, said Tsunde, closing her eyes. And it's up to me to preserve it all. You'll have help, said the old man smiling. Shizune will be there to make sure nothing bad happens. Hey, Tsunde chuckled, stifling a tear, good old Shizune, how well do you think Naruto would do if he were in command of an army? Asked the Hokage, changing subjects with all the subtlety of a boot to the face. Jiraiya grimaced, knowing exactly what the question meant. If things get out of hand, he said, Naruto would be my first choice for a captain, maybe not commanding general, but put him in charge of a few squads and he won't disappoint you. The boy's a tactical mastermind. I'll remember that, said Tsunde, you're dismissed. I'll send for you in a day or two though to discuss a few things. Right, said Jiraiya, I'm off for now then. The old hermit turned and crossed the length of the room in a few short strides, then opened the thick and nearly soundproof oak door. Without a glance back, he exited quietly and disappeared. "You can come in now," said the Hokage solemnly after Jiraiya's footsteps had faded. After a moment, Shizune's head appeared through the door just before the woman walked into the office in her customary blue robes. "You sounded stressed," said a smiling Shizune, closing the door behind her as she entered fully and watched the Hokage. "What can I do to help?" The lock on the door clicked shut as graceful fingers rolled around the little knob. "SC. Well, this is impressive," mumbled Naruto as he stood in front of the massive cherry wood gate to the Hyuga's estate. The large wooden doors were encircled by a lime-washed gatehouse, 15 feet high, which connected to an equally white wall that encircled the grounds. "They've been a little busy," commented the blonde as he reached out and knocked twice. A small window, disguised to look like part of the gate, slid open revealing a double mirror, the kind the person on the inside can see through but the one on the outside can't. "And just who are you?" asked a calm voice from over the gate. "Uzumaki Naruto," said Naruto. "I was hoping to see Neji. Do you think that could be arranged?" "Neji-sama is a very busy person these days," said the voice, "but he does try to entertain guests who won't waste his time." "What's your business?" "I've recently come across some information that I think he'd like to acquire and pass along to his superior." "Sounds like a scam," laughed the voice on the other side. "It very well could be," said Naruto, shrugging, "but if it's not then, well, I'm not sure what your leader would do if I took this somewhere else." There was silence from the guard across the gate for just a moment. "Fine, but if he can't see you then you're just out of luck," said the guard as the gate slid open on well-oiled hinges. Naruto stepped through, greeted immediately by two identical Hyuga ninja, each more than 6 feet tall, and wearing lavender robes to match their eyes. The guards carried short swords across their backs, which is needless to say, unusual for the Hyuga. Also, they wore around their NS, small bronze pendants like twisted roses on gold chains. "Thank you," said Naruto cordially. "Do you think one of you could show me the way though? I don't know where to find him." "Just follow the main corridor," said one of the indistinguishable guards, pointing down the marble walkway towards the mansion's elegant ebony doors. "At the end is the primary chamber, and you'll find Neji-sama's personal study on the east end of it." "Thanks again," said the blonde. Neji-sama. Naruto wondered to himself, mulling the honor-filled term around in his head. He passed along the white stone sidewalk quietly. The cherry blossom trees lining the walk swayed just a little as the wind picked up, scattering a few of the pink flowers across the lawn. His sandals clacked as Naruto stepped up the stairs. He reached out and pushed open one of the large ebony doors with the flat of his hand, revealing a beautifully decorated hall running down the center of the complex. The alabaster walls were trimmed in gold leaflets and separated by a reflective, lacquered hardwood floor running between them. Chandeliers hung along the ceiling at even intervals, casting a bright but not blinding light all throughout the hall. The beautifully whitewashed walls were contrasted occasionally by mahogany doors and framed pictures. The only things missing were the people. As Naruto strode down the hall, stricken by the decorum, he was equally taken back by the complete lack of people. The hall was empty and silent. Even by the time he reached the richly decorated doors at the end of the hall, he hadn't heard so much as the stir of a mouse. He pushed the doors open and stepped inside the unoccupied main chamber, expecting to see a room equally as grand as the hall. But as he looked around and the door closed of its own weight behind him, all he saw was a simple, thatched panel floor and unadorned lathe walls. The windows were simple and let in just enough of the morning sun that one could see clearly the single piece of furniture, a table, in the center of the room. "Who's there?" called a voice from a side room before Naruto could speak. "Uzumaki Naruto," said the blonde. "Is Neji anywhere around here? I was hoping I could have a word with him." Naruto looked towards the doorless arch leading to what he would normally thought was likely a kitchen as he heard the sound of a chair's legs sliding along the thatched floor. A second later a tall man in a white robe walked quickly out of the arch. His exceedingly dark hair was pulled back into a shoulder-length ponytail, though his bangs hung down to frame one side of his angular face. He was different, but Naruto instantly recognized him as Neji. "Naruto?" the Hyuga asked, his lavender eyes flickering with surprise. "When did you get back?" "Just this morning," said Naruto. "Good to see you again. How have things been while I was gone?" Not horrible, Neji stammered, still not recovered from the surprise of the sudden visit, but I don't want to be rude. You've been gone a long time. Come into the study. I've got an extra seat and some sake, we can talk there. He gestured towards the door. Naruto nodded as he and Neji crossed the distance to the arch and walked through into a small room, not larger than a middle-class bedroom, with the same lavish decorations as the previous room, none. There was a simple desk up against one wall, with the two walls on either side covered in floor-to-ceiling, scrap-board bookcases. In the center of the room a white bottle sat atop a low, plain table, and two cushions sat next to the table on the floor. Neji walked to the desk, which was covered in open books and unfurled scrolls, and closed one particularly large, leather-bound volume. The aged leaves of the book crackled as they folded over on themselves and Neji pushed the volume a little farther back on the table. So, said Naruto, kneeling on one of the cushions as the Hyuga took a small pair of stone cups and set them on the table, I'm guessing there have been some changes in the way the Hyuga clan operates since I left. Neji knelt down opposite Naruto and poured one cup of the rice liquor. What was the first cue? He asked with a minute grin on his lips. Well, for one, there's the fact that the guards referred to you as Neji-sama, and that you've got a private study, which makes me think that you've done a considerable amount of climbing on the social ladder around here. And seeing as how that's hard for the Branch family to do, it makes me wonder. Did you study under a detective while you were out? Asked Neji good-humoredly. Part of being a ninja, replied the blonde. Yes, there have been some changes in the inter-family politics, said Neji. For one, I'm, for all intents and practical purposes, the current head of the clan. Naruto flinched. He hadn't expected the changes to be quite that drastic. How did you manage that? Asked the nin. Neji shrugged. It's a long story. Suffice it to say that there was some dissension in the clan after Hiyashi-sama and Hinata-sama SD 3 years back. Members of the family in both houses were torn on what to do. Some wanted Hanabi, the next in the direct line to govern, to take over immediately. Others wanted someone else to be head, as Hanabi was too young. And you decided to compromise, said Naruto, seeing where the story was going. Neji poured sake into the second of the two cups and took a measured sip from his before answering. You'd be amazed how bull-headed some of these people can be, said the raven-haired Hyuga. The two factions, head members and branch members on both sides, were about ready to declare war on each other, and Hokage-sama knew that if she intervened it would leave resent and frustration with everyone, so she stayed cautiously neutral. Which side were you on? Naruto asked, ignoring the drink before him. Did you want someone else to take over for Hanabi? No, said Neji as he set the cup down gingerly. I was utterly against the idea, so I stayed behind my cousin the whole time. I wanted her to be the head of the clan, seeing as how it was and is her place. But not everyone else saw eye to eye with me on that one. And of course no one would listen to Hanabi, said Naruto, seeing as how one side would say she was too young to know what was right and the other would say she was just being manipulated. Exactly, said Neji, and she saw this so she decided to remain quiet in the matter and let everyone else argue it out. Awfully astute for a little girl, commented Naruto, she must have done some quick growing up after her father SD. She did, interestingly enough. Honestly, I expected her to become more greedy and selfish, but to the contrary, she became more tactful and discreet. This had all taken place within a year of your leaving, and over the next 6 months relations between the two sides degenerated even more. It got so bad that Tsunade-sama finally had no choice but to step in and offer to be a moderator. And it didn't go over well, predicted Naruto. Correct, said Neji. Both sides were furious that someone from outside the family was trying to dictate policy, but when Tsunade-sama threatened to expel the whole clan from Konoha, a very risky move on her part to be sure, everyone finally stopped fighting over who should be the head of the clan just long enough to wonder if they should just split the family and leave the village. Damn, mumbled the blonde. They were really thinking about leaving Konoha. Neji nodded. I wasn't joking when I told you they were, and stiff-Ned. But as fate would have it, the new debate bought Hanabi-sama just enough time to come up with an idea. And, probed Naruto. By now it was almost 19 months after you left, and Hanabi-sama approached one of the more respected head family members on the side that wanted her to rule. She asked, knowing that he'd be loyal to her, for him to go before everyone and suggest a compromise. Naruto grinned, so I was right. Quite, said the Hyuga. It was proposed that the clan would elect someone to serve as the ruling party for the family for 7 years, during which time Hanabi would be head in name only. After the 7 years though, Hanabi would take her place as the true head, while the one who had been serving up to that point would step down and become the second in command. It was a good idea really, and was met with cautious applause from both sides. And you were elected as the second? Asked Naruto. I was, Neji nodded, despite that I'm not really that much older than Hanabi-sama. And that was really the end of the matter. Sure, there were people on both sides who were dissatisfied, but they were outnumbered so they couldn't really complain. So Hanabi has no real political power? Asked Naruto. That has to be frustrating. It's not that she has none, said Neji, I've appointed her to be part of my advisory staff, and I listen to her often. She's smarter than anyone else her age, and her mind has come to work logically. On top of that she's creative, which allows her to come up with interesting ideas. My only mistake was giving her free rein over the decorations of the complex. So that's why everything has transformed into some kind of palace, Naruto mused. Well, you must admit that she has taste. Expensive taste, muttered Neji, but at any rate, that's why things seem to be a little off around here. Because you're renovating, Naruto joked. Neji laughed, that too. A chuckle escaped Naruto as he pushed the sake aside and rested one hand on the flat wood surface of the table. Wow, a lot more than I thought has changed around here. What else have I missed? Not too much has happened within the village, Neji shrugged. Lots of housing developments have sprung up like wild grass, and Tsunade-sama's face is up on the monument, but that's about it. The political scene is a mess, but that's a whole other story. Politics, Naruto emphasized a melodramatic grimace at the word, then looked out the window. The morning sun had risen just a little in the sky. I think it's just about time I got going, said Naruto, standing up. Neji got to his feet as well. Sorry to hear, you just arrived, but I'd imagine that you have some kind of business to attend to. Naruto nodded. I do have one question though, and thank you for your hospitality. Of course, said the Hyuga, what do you want to know? When I first got here, Naruto began, there were 2 identical ninja with swords at the gate to greet me. Normally I wouldn't bat an eye at the swords, but I've never before seen a Hyuga carry a hand-to-hand weapon, and I was wondering if something else had changed. Neji grinned just a little. I wouldn't say anything has really changed, but we have expanded our styles of combat. You still use Gyuken though? Naruto asked. Absolutely, said the Hyuga, making his voice clear. Gyuken is still our ultimate weapon. It's just that, what with all the recent military build-up, I decided a while back to recruit every able Hyuga into a combat force. The whole clan essentially fights as ninja on active duty for Konoha now. The best warriors in the family were taken and formed into an elite fighting unit called the Keen. When it comes to open combat, they're the slyest fighting force in Konoha, and they carry swords as a symbol of their position. You sound proud of them, said Naruto. The whole clan is, said Neji as he and Naruto walked out of the study and into the main hall. The children look up to the Keen as something like a superhero. There are only 6 of them, so to be accepted into their ranks is considered an honor. They're that good, eh? Would you like to meet them? Neji asked. If you have time. Naruto paused, then grinned and nodded. I can spare a little while longer. SC. Konoha's best, said Neji, a taste of pride in his voice as he gestured to the 6 tall ninjas standing along the marble sidewalk outside the main Hyuga complex. Each one trained to be a master of taijutsu and ninjutsu. 3 specialize in genjutsu and the other 3 specialize in complex summons. Naruto crossed his arms and let the approval show on his face. Each of the warriors was about the same height, nearly 6 feet tall, and they stood at perfect attention. Their exposed forearms looked like chiseled sandstone as the muscles shone with perfect definition beneath their skin, and it was obvious from the carved faces that there was no excess fat on any of them. The twins nodded towards Naruto in recognition, once they saw that Neji approved of him. One of the twins, the farthest to the right, stepped forward. He was slightly more muscled, Naruto noticed, than his brother and had especially toned arms. Like the other, his cheekbones were set high on his face, so when he looked towards Naruto, his gaze was piercing. Neji-sama, said the nin, turning to the second in command. Speak, said Neji. Sir, if I may, I would like to apologize for my behavior earlier. I did not realize Uzumaki-san was a friend of yours. The twin then turned to Naruto, bowed, and repeated his apology. Naruto wasn't sure how to react, but nodded and put one hand up to waist level. No regret necessary, you were just doing your job. Thank you, sir, said the nin as he stepped back into line. Well, asked Neji, what do you think? Quote, impressive to say the least, said the Uzumaki. If I ever get into a bind, I think I'll come to you guys. But I've overstayed and need to get going. Well then I won't stand in your way, said Neji with no cynicism in his voice. Though it's good to have you back, and if you ever need anything, you're more than welcome here. Thanks, said Naruto, I'll keep that in mind, but as for now, I think I'm off to find a house. The blonde bowed slightly, then turned around politely and began to walk away. The 6 ninja of Keen dispersed and seemed to disappear into the quiet complex as Neji watched Naruto leave. Try looking south of the market district, shouted the Hyuga commander as Naruto pushed the gate open. I hear the houses there are nice but reasonably priced. I'll do that, Naruto shouted back as the heavy gate closed behind him. It was a stark contrast to the warm day outside, the cold. The sunlight and warmth of midday couldn't hope to penetrate the hundreds of feet of earth and the stone ceilings of the massive underground complex. To any sane person it would seem impossible that life could exist so far underground, but there were indeed people, working and waiting patiently beneath the earth. A side effect of the secure location was the frigid temperature. Invisible diamonds of ice seemed to hang in the crystal clear air, which was just perfect for the work being done in the complex. The steady and rhythmic beat of the heart monitor beeped in the gloom, the only constant sound in the small, undecorated room. Occasionally the DS of an IV would shatter the silence, but not often, so it seemed all the more world-shaking when the door opened. A man with silver hair and a medium build walked into the room on quiet feet, his circular glasses reflecting the light from the various computer screens in bursts of white. His sound forehead protector seemed to be almost fluorescent in the dark as he stood over the sheet DRD bed. Are you awake? He asked in an almost serpentine voice. The cadaver-shaped mound beneath the sheet stirred. A pale hand reached up from beneath and the body pulled the covers away from its face. The teenage boy lying on the bed looked more ghostly than most corpses. His white hair was only slightly paler than his complexion, broken only by the dark rings around his eyes. I was dreaming, said the one on the bed. Oh, asked the one standing up as he walked to the cabinet beside the bed and took out a syringe. What were you dreaming about, Kimimaro-san? Fire, said Kimimaro. And Konoha. The leaf was burning to the ground. I think it was a prophecy, Kabuto. Kabuto smiled as he put a needle on the syringe and bent over the bed. He stuck the needle in Kimimaru's arm and began withdrawing blood. I wouldn't call a plan a prophecy, said the ninja. After all, it won't be too long until Lord Orochimaru's plans begin. And then Konoha will be nothing but a bad memory. Kimimaru slowly shook his head. It must be a prophecy, either that or the ramblings of a fevered mind. Why do you say that? Asked Kabuto, removing the needle and sealing off the syringe. Because I wasn't the one who set the fire that burned the village down, said the man on the bed. Rubbish, scoffed Kabuto. Now that the disease is in remission, it won't be more than a week before you're healthy and then things can begin. And besides, you may not be the one planned to house Lord Orochimaru, but you'll still be the one to expedite his plans, you and the Uchiha brat I mean. Konoha will burn without a doubt, said Kimimaru, but I'm beginning to think that neither I, nor Orochimaru-sama, will be the one to destroy it. You must still be tired, said Kabuto, go back to sleep. I'll check in on you again tomorrow and see how you're doing. I feel fine, said the Kaguya warrior, but perhaps you are right. Now leave me if you'd please. Kabuto nodded, slipped the vial of blood in his purple robe and exited the room, closing the door behind him. He didn't look back in, but instead began walking immediately and quickly down the narrow, cold, and featureless concrete hall. It was a short while before he reached a bend in the hall and turned to the single iron door beyond the corner. The sound nin reached out and pulled on one of the heavy metal rings, opened the door, and walked through. He was now in another room, this one colder than anywhere else in the complex, and much larger than Kimimaru's room. In truth, not a room, it was a laboratory, with numerous steel tables scattered about it, each one supporting a vast array of lab equipment. Kabuto skillfully navigated the maze of tables, being careful not to bump into any of them or knock over any of the sensitive instruments. His destination was the far corner of the large room, where a solitary figure hovered over a table illuminated by a strange purple light overhead. The figure in the gloom was working on something shrouded in a blood-spattered linen cloth. He turned as Kabuto approached. It was Orochimaru, his white skin glowing under the black light above him, and the folds of his usual robes trailing over his shape. Kimimaru-san is doing well, said Kabuto matter-of-factly as he reached the corner. He should be fit to take command of the forces in a week, 2 at the most. Good news, said the Snake Nin. I'll make a point to visit him within the next day or so, but I'm afraid that my work here takes priority. The silver-haired Nin nodded and took out the vial of blood, then set it down on a table behind Orochimaru. Speaking of which, asked Kabuto. Any luck with this? Orochimaru smiled wickedly as he turned from Kabuto and glanced at a large wooden box laying beside the table. It was shaped like a coffin and held shut by no less than a dozen thick locks. The heavy wood was carved with numerous black seals. I'd say it's going quite well, said the Sannin. I've finished the first, or should I say the fourth, and now I've only got one more to go. Wonderful, said Kabuto, and seeing as how you've already got the closest thing to the original body to work with, it should go much more smoothly. Not necessarily, said Orochimaru. Rebuilding a body from scrap parts isn't too difficult, but the subject's soul could prove thorny. The first subject's soul wasn't complex, relatively standard even, but the second, I don't know how her unique spirit will react to being reborn in a rebuilt body. I wouldn't worry about it, said Kabuto. After all, I doubt it will be something even minorly troublesome to you. Orochimaru smiled again. We'll have to see. Thank you, Kabuto. Kabuto bowed and turned to leave as Orochimaru went back to work. The Snake Nin bent carefully over the table, but as he reached out to grab a knife from a stand of razor-sharp implements, his loose sleeve caught on a frayed end of the sheet and jerked it. The linen fell away from the body beneath just enough, and a long lock of platinum blonde hair fell from its place to cold table below. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.